Thank you. Hello, everyone. On behalf of the UCSF Research Coordinating Center and Investigator Development Unit of the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities Multiple Chronic Diseases Consortium, I'd like to welcome you to our monthly training webinar. I'm Wandana Khalili, Professor of Medicine at UCSF and the Director of the Investigator Skills Development Unit. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place the land that UCSF sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ramaytush Ohlone community for their stewardship, support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Well, we are honored today to have Dr. Daichi Shimbo providing us information about the NIH K-Awards, which is critically important for those of you who are considering applying for a career development award. Dr. Shimbo is a board-certified cardiologist and professor of medicine in the Division of Cardiology in the Department of Medicine at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. He co-directs the Columbia Hypertension Center, a multi-disciplinary center of excellence that provides high-quality care and state-of-the-art diagnostic testing for patients with hypertension. Dr. Shimbo conducts rigorous, innovative, interdisciplinary research that increases the understanding of the behavioral, psychosocial, and biological processes in the pathogenesis of increased cardiovascular risk associated with hypertension. In 2018, Dr. Shimbo was appointed as the Director of the Training and Education of Columbia University's Transform KL2 Career Development Program to provide training and mentoring in skills essential to conducting clinical and translational research. He also co-teaches the Columbia K-Award program on-time proposal preparation. Dr. Shimbo, we look forward to your presentation, and for the audience, please feel free to enter questions in chat throughout the presentation, and we'll also be happy to answer questions at the end as well in person. Dr. Shimbo?
Okay, thank you for the very kind introduction. Apologies for the background noise. It started to, within the past 5 minutes, it went from extremely sunny to dark, overcast, and it's thunderstorming now. So I apologize for the noise. So what my role here is to talk to you about K-Awards. Now, some of you may be interested in applying for a K-Award. Today's session, I'm going to be giving you a 50,000-foot view. So if you were coming here looking for the secret sauce or the ingredients of what makes an ideal K-Award, I am certainly going to go over that superficially. But that's not really what I'm going to talk about. Really, I'm going to talk about what is it, why it's important, and if really it's right for you, because some of you are considering actually applying for this award. So you heard an introduction, but I just wanted to emphasize who I am. I live and breathe career development. That's who I am. I am a clinician investigator. I've been here since 2003. I'm cardiology trained. Please don't hold that against me. And I currently run the CTSA educational programs called Transform. I'm also the Associate Director of the CTSA. And as you can see here, I have a number of responsibilities through an Associate Dean role and really research career development. So I meet the people across campus, nursing, dentistry, School of Public Health, and the School of Medicine for people who are interested in actually becoming successful in research. I do my own work, and I just want to highlight, I've been very fortunate on the number of grants I have. I currently have 6 R01s, and that all emanated from what you see in red, which is a K Award. I literally think that was a spark that set me off to a research career. And then when I'm doing this, I'm trying to pay it back in my way of teaching and professional development. Just a few other things that you should recognize in Transform. That's part of the CTSA on top of my other responsibilities. I think it's really important to actually train junior people. A lot of you are junior, but I think it's really important to actually train you to get the skills you need to become successful. And what's important is I recognize not the traditional scholarly scientific path, but I also think allied research personnel are also extremely important. Like when we talk about community health workers or research nurses or dietitians, I think they're also a very important part of the team. Okay, so that was about me. Hopefully I've convinced you I perhaps am the right person to talk to you about writing a K. Let's take a step back. You know, obviously, if you're at an academic institution and you're considering right now 2 or 3 pillars of research, right? The most common 3 are patient care, teaching, and research. Some of you are not clinicians. Some of you are PhDs. That's perfectly fine. So you may not have patient care, but you certainly have an interest in teaching and research. So it's really 2 or 3 pillars of academic research. Many of you can think of very famous clinician investigators that you think, I want to be like that person. They're extremely successful. They're senior in the field. As you can see, multiple people here at UCSF who just heard about or are very famous in their fields. And so there's a thought that these are role models and these are mentors and these are people that inspire you to actually go into research. Now, when you're thinking about your path, this is my ladder of consideration. This is when I have junior people come to me and they're thinking about research, I have them think about where they are on this path. Are you just thinking about doing research? Is it a dabbling? You just want to see what it's like? Or are you more committed to thinking about whether you want to spend your career in research? These 2 things are very different. I have plenty of people, medical students, grad students, other students coming to me thinking about doing research and they want to get a paper, maybe they want to get a letter of recommendation. But that's very different than people who actually now want to spend their career in research. They're thinking about it, at least. Just thinking about it seriously. The third strong on the ladder is individuals who like to become an independent researcher. These are individuals who know that they want to spend their career in research. They want to actually make the long trek to become an independent researcher. And now they're committed. They're not thinking about it. They're committed. And then finally, the last ladder is I am an independent researcher. Okay, I've made it to the top and I'm doing research that I want to do. Now, many of you are going to ask me, what is an independent researcher? I've heard that word thrown around a lot. Simply put, it's a senior researcher who traditionally has grants from NIH, but not always. Some you might have grants from foundation grants, other different societies. That's perfectly fine. But typically, the traditional model for independent researcher is getting R01 grants. These are considered independent awards. In addition, you'd like to publish high-impact papers that change paradigms, and you want to become a world-renowned expert. Those are sort of characteristics of an independent researcher. I like to put in my own bias here. I think a 4th characteristic for an independent researcher, hopefully, is to pay back the next generation, and that they will actually lead the training and education for future people who actually want to become an independent researcher. So that is the classic model for independent research. Now, let's talk about NIH. And again, you might smirk at this characterization. I only put this up because I know that the Game of Thrones prequel is coming out next month. But whenever I hear people talk about NIH, they're frightened about it. They actually don't know what that is. What is the National Institutes of Health? They think of it as kind of this mythical place like King's Landing. And they don't really understand what is NIH, what are R01 grants, and why is that so important to a career of a person trying to seek independent funding? Well, NIH is simply a organization, an institute, a place that's situated outside of DC. It's in Bethesda, Maryland. Ironically, I grew up across the street. I had no idea as a kid what the NIH was. I just remember at that time, before they put those very large walls up, I would just walk my dog on the lawn of the NIH. So it's actually a physical place that people work at. And it's a very large organization. It's part of the US Department of Health and Human Services. It's comprised of 27 institutes and centers. It's more than 20,000 employees. And more than 80% of the budget goes to more than 300,000 research personnel at 2,500 universities and research institutes through more than 50,000 grants. So I want to be clear. NIH is a federal organization. They get a humongous budget, but they actually ship out most of their money, 80%, to academic institutions for people to conduct research. And only a small percentage, 10% of the budget actually goes to 6,000 NIH scientists who are situated in Bethesda. And those are called intramural programs. The other programs that go out are called extramural. There are a lot of institutes that are involved. And why am I telling you all this? Why am I getting down to details? Because I guess teaching point number one is when you're applying for a K, applying for a K award, these institutes are actually, think of them as banks. They're places that have a particular focus on a disease. And they are the ones that actually gets a certain budget compared to other institutes. So for example, I'm a cardiologist. I primarily send my grants into NHLBI. They're going to fund my grants through their portfolio. So think of these institutes as sort of banks that have a portfolio, they have an interest in a specific kind of research, and they fund you whether you're applying for a K or R01. Now, here's the tough bar. These are data that are publicly available from the NIH website. When I show this, I'm kind of looking at the faces of some of you all, but this is pretty daunting data. This is data of, of the number of R01 grants in dark blue that have submitted over time. And you can see here that there is a steady incline of NIH R01 applications. The lighter blue bars are the actual ones that have been awarded. And what's sobering is, even though the number of NIH applications have gone up, the number of actual awards remains pretty flat. So that the relative success rate, this red line, is just the percentage of success. You're just taking the baby blue line, dividing it by the dark blue line, is the percent chance of being successful. So you can see here that at least in 2020, there's about almost a 20% chance of actually getting an R01 award. What's even more sobering is that if you're a first-time investigator, a new person, and you're applying for an R01, which is really that underlies the definition of an independent investigator, the funding rates are actually lower for early stage investigators compared to established. Now, many of you may actually think that's unfair, and it certainly is. Now, NIH is trying to do their best to close their gap here, but it just makes you feel perhaps sobered, the fact that becoming this famous scientist, becoming this famous investigator who's independent is very difficult. I mean, in my R01s, I probably spend 50 to 80 hours putting it together, and an early stage investigator is probably spending more. Can you imagine doing all that work when you really only have an overall little over a 20% chance? It's actually worse for you than someone who's more established. So how does one go from all of you who may be interested in writing a K, and I'll explain what that is, to becoming this famous clinician investigator if the odds are going to be low and against your favor? Well, that's where a K award comes in. The NIH recognizes that R01s are high reach. And so K awards are training grants. A lot of people mistake that. A lot of people think, indeed, there is a project tied to the K award, but really it's mostly a training grant. It takes an early career scientist, supports them, they're committed in becoming an independent investigator. Remember that ladder that I showed, and helping them get from almost independent to independent. And so in my ladder, a K award is perfect for if you're here, you would like to become an independent researcher. And in order to get there, to get your first R01, you need actually that extra support through a K award. K awards, I want to reiterate, this is really important here. I have a lot of fellows and grad students and people approach me. They think of a K award as a ribbon, an outcome, a thing that they get on their resume, their CV. And they often think about it when they're in the first or second stage. Like I have some fellows that are graduating saying that, oh, I should just get a K award because I can then come on to faculty and get a better position. Although that might be certainly true, I don't think they've thought it out. And I'm going to go into why that might be foolish to actually just apply for a K, particularly if you're not committed. And my major teaching point here is for you to become independent. And instead of going for that R01 from the beginning, I think it's really important to actually apply for a K when you're at this step. If you're at the first two steps, you should rethink about whether you're applying for a K. So as I warned you, I am taking a 50,000-foot view about who actually should be applying for this and who should not. Now, what about K award funding ability? This is data that's publicly available from NIH, and you can certainly see that same kind of thing. The dark blue is the number of applications. You can see that the number of K award applications have gone up. The number of K awarded have also gone up slightly. I would say since 2013, there's been a steady increase. And you can see this, you can see that the success rates for K awards are hovering around 30%, and it continues to go up over time. So here's some sobering data, and this is something that I really advocate to you all. These are overall success rates by the different kinds of K awards, and I'm going to get to those. There are many different kinds of K awards. You can see here that, for example, K08, which traditionally for people not doing patient-oriented research, at least in 2020, there was a 41% chance of getting that. If you're interested in a K01, there's a 35% chance. If you're interested in K23, there's a 38% chance. So that's really, 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 really good. And you can see data from data books. You can see over time that the award trends for K awards, and I showed you that this early data is beginning to go up. And you can see very much so which institutes, which banks in NIH have the most money. And you can see that NHLBI, for example, or NIDDK are the ones with the most funding. And by definition, since they have the most funding, they have the most success. They have the highest success rates because they just have more money. Now, I just want to pause here for a second and ask if anyone have questions at this moment. I thought this would be a natural place to stop. Does anyone want to unmute and ask your questions? Type your questions in the chat. Don't worry. You know, this is supposed to be a time for discussion. Okay. Well, I'm hoping some of you, remain interested at the end, because there's going to be a significant time at the end for Q&A. And also, again, if you have any questions that pop in your head during my presentation, please throw that up. Is there a question in the chat? Oh, no, just reminding people that they can raise their hand, put their question in the chat. Okay. So I don't list all different K awards, but I just want to show you the most common ones that I've seen, at least at my institution, is many people apply for K08, which is really non-patient oriented research. These are individuals who are promising clinician scientists. K23 are clinically trained. It's more heavier toward patient-oriented research. K01s, they differ by institute. I've seen K01s, for example, at NIH want to focus on data sciences, or they want to focus on epidemiologic research. Other ones are like traditional KOH or K23. So it actually depends. So this is kind of a miscellaneous K category. And then one thing that's been most popular is something called a K99 ROO. Kangaroo is the short term for this. This is kind of a grant that's in between a K and R01. And the first 2 or 3 years are K training, and the last 2 are R01 level grants. So it's supposed to help really high qualified postdoctoral scientists or researchers who actually may be advanced. They don't need the entire 4 or 5 years it's on a K. They just need a few years to get some skill in order for them to move to an independent award. In order for them to get the ROO awards, they just have to submit a progress report to NIH, and they decide whether or not that second tranche of money for the ROO is actually funded.
Dr. Shimbo, we have a couple of questions in the chat. Nayla is asking, if we are in the stage between thinking of doing research and spending career in research, any recommendations for webinars and resources? Yeah, so I am very much a see one, do one, teach one model. I guess that's my unfortunate clinician hat on. And really, for people who are thinking about doing research, I know that, and I've seen this, I know a lot of people, like I'm just thinking of my own mentees that come to me and they're thinking about doing research. They often grasp onto, oh, should I get a master's? Should I get an MPH? Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do this boot camp? Should I do these workshops? Should I do this and that? And from my point of view, I think that I think it's more important to actually do, meaning that it's more important to actually arrange yourself with a mentor that you're actually doing research. You're actually doing a study, embedding yourself in a study. Maybe you're a coordinator. Maybe you are not a coordinator, but you're involved in writing manuscripts for data that's already been collected. Or maybe you're writing a systematic review. I think for those individuals who are thinking about it, I think doing is better than actually attending a webinar or resources. Because really, it's so easy to describe what it's like to be doing research, but it's different when you actually do it. So that's my recommendation for those that are still thinking about it. We have another question about, do you recommend strategically applying to the different institutes based on their level of fundings, like NHLB? Oh, yeah, absolutely. So listen, there are 2 things that you can manipulate, and the NIH allows you to manipulate when you submit a grant to NIH. Okay. Now, if you're talking about an R01, that is the study section that it's going to go to. And the second thing is which institute is going to pay for it. Okay. So you're going to do 2 things. You're going to look at which study section, they're posted online. You can actually see who's part of the study section for a particular grant, who the permanent reviewers are. And you can also see what the K funding rates for different organizations are. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So you can be really strategic about where you're applying. And the K award is similar, which is that you can apply to institutes where the K award actually is really high. My only caution is make sure you're not putting a round peg in a square hole, which is that if, for example, this comes up a lot, if you are interested in depression and heart disease, for example. So I'm a cardiologist,
Or, should I apply to NHLBI or should I apply to psychiatry, the institute that has a lot of psychiatric grants, mental health disorders. And whoever you apply to, you have to make sure that you craft your idea that's consistent with what the bank wants, what the institute wants. So in answer to your question, yes, I think that's a really important thing to do, is determine what the funding rates are and determine where you're sending it to.
If I can ask one that came to me as a direct message in the chat, and this is also relevant to the discussion here about hit rates at different institutes and hit rates in general. Is there an advantage to applying for a K-01 as faculty at a research center affiliated with an R1 institution versus a minority serving R2 institution?
So is there a benefit? No, so my understanding is the K award funding rates, okay, that I described are independent of the institution. That's not actually in the criteria. It's actually how much, it's literally a gross indication of how much grants are submitted and how much is awarded. What's more important, and I'm going to go into that, is I'm going to actually go into the criteria for K awards, which will sort of help you decide whether you're a competitive person for a K award at a particular institution. I think that's what's more important.
Thank you so much. We do have more questions in the chat, and I know we'll also have a longer Q&A at the end. So do you want to take more now, or?
Yeah, I think I'll move forward only because I have some slides I have to get through. I'm actually, just so you know, I don't want to turn people off. Keep your questions going. This is great. This is exactly what I want. Okay. So let's just move forward. So I'm going to go into some of the mechanics. And again, I'm going to go down to a 20,000 foot level. So what is a K consisting of? Well, there's a cover letter. There's a project summary, which is merely a 30-line abstract to what you're proposing. There's a project narrative that's 1 or 2 lines. That's really meant to be written in layperson's terms for the general public. There is a facility and resource document that you have to convince the reviewers that the place that you're doing your K is actually a great place to do your K. And then that you're surrounded by the necessary equipment. If, for example, you're going to be proposing to do, I'm going to make this up, some flow cytometry analysis, you have to make sure that you have availability to a core lab or investigator who has that machine. Because this is a K award, very much importantly that you describe yourself, the candidate's information and goals, your background, goals and objectives, and your plan for career development training activities. This is misunderstood by many people. This is oftentimes written by people to be what your personal statement is for medical school, grad school, whatever. That is not what that is. This personal statement is about why you need a K, how you got here from your previous training, and what remains and what you need. So it's very much a research career training document. It's literally only 3/4 of a page to a page. Then you have a specific aims page, and then you have a small research plan. Typically an R01 is 12 pages, but for it's actually much smaller. It's in the order of 4 or even 5 pages. And so I just want to be clear. A lot of people misunderstand the K. When they talk to me about their K, they're talking about their project. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. The first thing you should be talking about what training you're going to receive. I've had plenty of people apply for a K and they're just proposing to do what they're already doing now. And reviewers hate that because you're not proposing anything new to your training that would bring you to the next field. So a lot of you are doing implementation science or community-based participatory research. A perfect K training plan would be you're being trained in those areas which you're new to, and you want to apply it to previous research which you didn't do those two. And then you're proposing a research plan that's consistent with community-based participatory research or implementation science. So that's a perfect kind of study. If you already do that and you've been doing it for years, and you put a K in, even though you've been successful, the reviewers won't like that because you're not proposing anything new. So I want to be very clear. This is a training grant, not necessarily a research plan grant. In addition, you can't do this by yourself. A typical K has only $20,000 to $50,000. I want to say this again, $20,000 to $50,000 for non-salary costs. That is nothing to actually run a real project. And so you got to be able to show that you're surrounded by a team of awesome people who will support you financially, who will support you with a lot of grants, and that will support you with a lot of resources. You also have to submit letters of report from the department head or division head showing that you're at the right place. In addition to all of that, you also have to submit letters of support from thought leaders, reference letters that show that you're awesome and that you're the best thing that's ever happened, and to support your application. There are other components like the institutional environment that's different than facilities and equipment. The commitment letter, which basically says that you have carved out time to do your research. You're going to submit bio sketches. There's a human subject section you have to fill out. And if you're doing trials, you certainly have to fill out some additional segments. And then there's a budget and budget justification. If you're interested in what the really different components are, the NIH has a really beautiful website that can go over all of the wonderful things that you can do, or what kind of K awards there are and which one fits with you. And it's called a K kiosk. Now, I'm just going to spend a moment to go very briefly over what happens when you submit your grant. When you submit your K award and you've written it, it goes to the Center for Scientific Review, which is a building. It's NIH staff. You submit your grant, and then it goes to a clearinghouse, Center for Scientific Review, and then they send it to the study section. People are scientists that are outside of NIH. NIH doesn't review your grant. It's actually scientists outside of NIH have been recruited to review your grants. Once your application gets a score, it's reviewed and then ranked by score and percentile. And then the advisory council is when all the banks get together and say, look, this application that applied for NHLBI, this is the one that we like to fund based on their score. So there's a two-step process, which is you submit, it's reviewed, but the decision for funding actually happens later at the council letter. So I just want to be clear, when you're sending it to review, they don't make any funding decisions. It happens later. So your proposal submitted to CSR, remember I told you you can make two different acknowledgments of what you want, what study section it's going to go to, and what institute's going to fund it. For Ks, that's combined. There are specific K award study sections run by institutes. You can actually go see what their funding rates are. You can actually see who's on it and who's likely to be friendly to your kind of work. And the administrative officer at NIH that handles your applications is someone called a scientific review officer. They themselves are actually scientists, but they want to do administrative work. They're responsible for recruiting scientists to review your application. So your SRO, scientific review officer, is trying to make your, I'm just going to paraphrase, your reviewer skilled and savvy and impartial and diverse. But what's really, really, really important, and I think a lot of junior people miss this, is a lot of Ks don't do well because you write it like a paper. Now, a lot of you submit, like I'm a hypertension person, and I'm going to submit to hypertension journals. So I have an expectation that when I submit my grant to a hypertension journal, I already know that they're going to assign reviewers that are remotely or even close to the area that I'm proposing. But be very careful. Even though I might, for example, write a grant on blood pressure and hypertension, there is no guarantee at all any of the people reviewing it are actually going to be clinicians like myself, experts in hypertension, and even experts in cardiovascular disease, even though it went to an NHLBI study section. Because NHLBI also covers the lung. So I might have a pediatric pulmonologist reviewing my grant. And so what's really important is when you're writing your grant, you should make it broadly understandable for all kinds of people, not just the people in your area. So several months later, your application is delivered for reviewers. It's assigned a reviewer 1, 2, and possibly 3. So your application gets 3 or 4 reviewers. And then the study section convenes for 2 days in DC and Bethesda, or alternatively, sometimes on the West Coast. They give it a scoring of 1 to 9, or 9 is the absolute worst and 1 is the best. And they gave you an overall impact score that's actually based on the individual scores for the different segments. Remember, I told you what the components are of your application. They're going to base how good are you as a candidate? How good is your proposed training? How good is your research plan? And I'm highlighting it in red only to signify, unlike an R01 where it's all research plan, a K is different. They're scoring you on everything, including the research plan. The research plan is only one component. They're going to score you based on mentors, consultants, and collaborators, so that if you have mentors who are not NIH funded, you have to be very thoughtful if that's the right approach. And then they're also going to score you on environment and institutional commitment. Each of these criteria gets a score from 1 through 9, and then a reviewer gives an overall score. And then once that's done, they talk about protecting our human subjects. They talk about women, minorities, and children. I want to make sure your grant is well, your study is well diverse in the patient population, the participant population. And then they talk about the budget and budget justification. One thing you should be aware of is, I just told you each of your components gets a score, but the reviewer actually is not obligated to average the scores. A lot of people, like for example, if you get 4 for a candidate, 1 for your career development plan, 2 for your research plan, 3 for your mentors, consultants, and collaborators, and 2 for your environment. A lot of people think that means that you should average the scores, but in fact, you may have a stodgy reviewer that only loves to focus on the research plan, while others only focus on career development. So I just want to be clear that it's actually all components that are really important. It's not, even though I'm selling you this as a non-research project grant, it's career development, you still do have to make sure all components are really solid, because the reviewer actually may differently weight their individual components to get you the overall score. So before the study section meeting, reviewers submit their scores, they submit their overall scores, and they do then average the reviewer score. So if you have 3 reviewers, you have an overall average of the scores. And then, this is kind of brutal. Let's say there are 100 K award applications that were submitted. They're ranked from best average overall score to the worst. And the SRO simply makes a median cut. And then half of them are not going to be discussed, and the other half are going to be discussed in study section. At the study section meeting, there's the SRO, the chairperson, which is the head scientist of the study section. There's other NIH staff, and they discuss and not discussed list. They go over whether or not everyone agrees whether the applications in the not discussed list remain there and therefore won't ever be discussed in study section. That's pretty sobering, because you might have spent 100 hours, and if your application falls into the not discussed category, it's pretty awful that your application was not discussed. But in fact, that's just a time-saving measure, because there is no way, if you're in a not discussed category, just at current NIH funding rates, that you would ever reach a point that you would be funded. So it's, I hate to say it this way, it's a quick death for your application, but then you can get the comments back and work to revise. And for along those lines, a lot of my mentees, when they get a not discussed, they get severely depressed. They think they've done something wrong. And no, of course not. Think about it. If you have 3 reviewers and 2 of the reviewers give you a perfect 1 and the 3rd reviewer gave you a 9, that 1 reviewer drove your score down into the bottom half, and therefore you're not discussed. And so it's really just 1 reviewer that ruined your day. So it's just something to be mindful of, is just want to be clear how these applications are scored. So the reviewers, I'm just going to paraphrase for time, they discuss their applications amongst the 3 reviewers. Then they open it up to the rest of the people in the room, and then the whole room actually votes, not just the 3. So this might shock you. Everyone else in the room besides the 3 has not read the application, yet they're voting on an application that's been discussed. So it's up to the 3 reviewers to bring about a healthy discussion on the applications. And it's almost like a jury system, which is everyone else is a jury, and it's just the 3 reviewers, like who are the lawyers that are trying to convince the study section of which one they should put their scores by. Should it be toward the worst one or the best one? And then, as I say, after it's been scored by everyone, then we start talking about gender, children, race, ethnicity, ethical considerations, and then budget considerations. After you get your final score of all reviewers, your average score is, remember, it's 1 through 9, is going to be multiplied by 10 to get the priority score. So if I got an average score of 45, 4.5, and I multiply that by that 10 to get 45, then you can see here different institutes actually published on their website that if I got a 45, NHLBI, for example, says that since my score is worse than 32, I likely won't be funded based on my priority score. If you fall right at the threshold, you're 32, 33, you may or may not be funded. That's actually decided by a council. So don't be discouraged if you fall below the funding line. You may have a fairy godmother or fairy godfather, the NIH staff, who can push for your application called Select Pay, and then get your application funded, even though it fell below the published lines for funding. And then 6 to 8 weeks later, you get a summary of discussion points. If your application was not discussed, if your application was not discussed, you get the reviewer's comments, which are written down. From that point forward, because now it's the institute's hands, whether or not they're going to fund you or not, now the main contact is the program officer. Think of it, the program officer is the bank representative, because they're the representative of the institutes. Now, that was just a 20,000-foot view, and this is a sobering timeline. I want to show you, get into details about what it takes to prepare for a K. So, for example, you can see in cycle 1, I could submit a new K for February 12th, okay? I'm not going to get it reviewed until June or July, okay? And the summary statement is actually not sent to me until July or August. The bank, the advisory council, doesn't meet until August or October. And in fact, that's when funding decisions are made, and you're not starting, even though you submitted in February, you're actually not getting money to start the project sometime between September or December, more likely December, since NIH has been slow. So that's a good 11 months to go from beginning of the submission to the end to know about funding. Most of you, when you apply, unless you get a hole in one the first time, are going to have to resubmit. And there, you can see here, do you see that you get your summary statement way after the next deadline, which is for submission is July 12th. If you get your summary statement in July or August, there is no way you're going to revise it in time for a July 12th deadline. So you're going to submit it for a November 12th deadline. And with a November 12th deadline, assuming it gets funded the second time around, it won't actually get funded until July. I want you to think about this. If 2 submissions and you submit, you're not going to get funds until a year and a half later if you're resubmitting for a project. So that's why I saw some things in the chat about how fellows should be applying. I'm like, yeah, that might be true, but you have to apply way in advance as a fellow in order to be funded the second time around. You might be lucky getting it funded the first time around, but if you get it funded the second time around, you're looking at a year and a half. And so this is a very big commitment to actually write the project and get it submitted. And in fact, many of you, almost all of you, will not follow in my advice. I have a lot of mentees that come to me and say, I'm going to be applying for October, and it's already August. I'm like, okay. And really, the best way to do it is to plan a year in advance. This is not just my opinion, but a lot of people say that you should apply a year in advance. You can see all the steps that are involved that you're really not getting into 3 months before when you're really starting to finalize the project. Many of you are going to, just the nature of how busy you are, going to be applied at 3 or 6 months, but that's a really tight timeline. So my advice to you all, plan ahead, talk to your program officer. Not only are they the ones to separate your grant through a certain institute about whether it gets funded, they're also those ones to tell you whether your application is likely to be funded by a certain institute. So the analogy what I want is, if you want a bank loan, aren't you going to go to a bank, talk to the institution, the representative there, and say, hey, would you fund my project at my house? So it's really important to early on in the planning process to contact the PO and then run your project and your training by them so that they know that, yes, NHLBI is an appropriate place. Just a few pointers about how to write a darn good K. Do a really good job in writing clear, clean, and well-written application. I'm not being facetious here. If you can do this, this is 90% of the effort. I come across applications that are hard to read, and I automatically, as a reviewer, put them, I'm not going to give them a good score because you've made it difficult for me to read. So a clear, clean, well-written application will go a long way. In addition, there's a whole bunch of reasons why Ks are not successful, which are, there's no really good rationale for training. How will this training move you to independence is not clearly articulated. You're just saying that you're going to continue doing what you're already doing. Maybe you're overqualified. Maybe you're ready for an R01. Maybe you're underqualified. You're proposing the same training that you're already doing. I would avoid that. I just said that. The mentorship team is not interdisciplinary. That's really important. It's missing expertise, like there's no statistician or no psychologist and no behavioral medicine people. Those are the most common ones. The training in research is too close to the mentors. Remember, this is supposed to make you independent. So you've got to have a clear path away from your mentor. And there's no strong evidence of institutional support. The project itself lacks focus. It's not important enough. It's too complex. And the methods that you're proposing to solve the research question are insufficient or unsuited. And it's just too premature, too high risk for you to be proposing. And then finally, there's just too little details in the research plan. I know it's hard. It's only 4 to 5 pages. And there's just several trust me statements that just basically says, we could do this. Reviewers don't like this. You need to present evidence that your team can do this. And unfortunately, there's lack of pilot data. K awards are not supposed to have pilot data, but the truth of the matter is, in the real world, you're supposed to have pilot data. And that's why I'm a big fan of these IDC pilot grants, because these IDC pilot grants are supposed to give you the pilot data and feasibility for you to actually take that data, for you to propose a really good K, or really good R01 or R03. So that's why the next step after the IDC getting a pilot award, it's very valuable for that pilot data. So let's just get back. I'm almost done. K awards get you from I'd like to be an independent researcher to an independent researcher. And then I'm going to stop here. Perfect. I wanted to do about 10 minutes of Q&A. So I'm going to stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Shimbo, for that outstanding presentation. We have a number of questions in the chat, and audience, please feel free to also raise your hands. To just follow up on the pitfalls that you had shared with us, how important is having a track record of publishing with your K mentors? Do you recommend holding off on applying if you don't have many papers published with them yet?
That's a great question. I'm going to use one of my mentees who ended up getting a K, but she had no papers with me. Okay, and that was the primary mentor. And the way we did that is we just showed that we were starting a healthy, strong, collaborative relationship. And so My mentee actually had papers in other areas. It was in areas of obesity and diabetes. I don't do that. Had about 3, 4, potentially 5 papers. So showing that there are winners, they're productive. The coming to me, I do hypertension work, and she wanted to do maternal fetal medicine and preeclampsia. And so what we ended up doing, we applied for a year in advance. We applied for a small pilot award. Guess what? Like the IDC. And we got that together where I was being mentored by, I was mentoring this person in their pilot study, and then we had some preliminary data. And so the reviewers bought that. And they said, you're a great candidate, and you've already built a nice team through your IDC. I'm using the IDC as an example. It was another grant similar to the IDC. And you've already built a nice team, and you're already collecting pilot data. Good, perfect. You are a great candidate for K. And she ended up getting like a top 10 percentile for her K, because she did that, even though she didn't have a single paper with me. So I think that's the way. Of course, it's great if there's more papers. That'd be ideal, but I'm saying that you can get around that if you show some productivity.
Got it. There were questions about, can you apply as faculty for a K award?
Yes. So I also saw some questions about whether you can be a fellow versus faculty. And yes, some of the K awards you can be a postdoc fellow. And I just saw something in the chat. I want to dispel a misunderstanding about Ks. And I didn't say this in my talk. So this is very common. I am a fellow, and I go to my division head or department head, and I say, hey, I'm one of the fellows here, and I want to write a K, but I need to submit an institutional letter of support that basically says they're going to give me an office, they're going to give me a title, I'm going to be assistant professor, and my time is going to be protected. And the department heads sit there and go, oh, no, I haven't even committed to taking you. There's no contract here. Now, that is certainly possible. I was one of the lucky ones when I applied for a K. I was able to negotiate that ahead of time. But for most people, that's unlikely. And in fact, what's written in the chat, which should not be done, because NIH says it shouldn't be done, is oftentimes the letter says something like, we will give you these resources if you get your K. Nope. NIH basically says this should not be dangled as a piece of fruit or something in front of the awardee. The awardee, the mentee, the person applying should already have these things. And so the institutional letter should say that they already have these things or will have these things, and they promise, not that it's contingent upon getting the K. That's a big no-no. NIH actually says don't do that. And so getting back to your question is, that's why, unless you're absolutely sure as a fellow, whether you have basic good resources, the mentorship, and you have a stamp of approval that you're going to start as faculty, or you have a determined position, most people apply during their early years of their faculty. The downside of that, and I'm sorry to belabor the point, but it's really important because the fellow to faculty transition is very vulnerable. The downside of that is, if you're a clinician, or let's say you're not a clinician, you have a lot of teaching responsibilities, someone's got to pay your salary. And if you don't have a K, they're going to sit there and say, okay, you can write your K during your first 2 or 3 years of being faculty here, but we're going to give you a heavy clinical or teaching load. And so what's going to end up happening is that you're going to be climbing your way out of writing my K at nights and weekends while you're actually heavily involved in other things. And so that's why a K award has to be articulated to the administrative staff of your division department, because they have to support you actually writing it with the mentorship team. And so that's why I want people to be mindful of, this is not a feather in the cap that you just apply and get. This is something that you have to vet with your mentorship team and your department division.
Wonderful. We had some questions about, the access to or emphasis on K grant preparation through T32 awards, and that, the commitment from the institution related to faculty positions once the K is funded and that transition, and whether other institutions practices are somewhat different.
Yeah, they're very different. I can't speak for every institution. Some institutions run the extreme, and I'm just going to be frank, and of course I'm not going to tell you who these institutions are, But some institutions take the approach that you shouldn't be even writing Ks. You should go for the gusto and apply for this R01s. And you might think that's insane. Why would you do that? Because the funding rates are so low, which is what I explained at the beginning, because I'm sorry, folks, this will sound depressing, but K awards bring a small amount of indirect costs to institutions versus R01s. And so some institutions don't like that because, and remember I told you how much funding there is to actually run a project on a K. So it actually costs the institution for you to write a K and get awarded because they have to support all those aspects. And so some institutions don't support that and they want you to get R01s. There's heavy in R01 programs to help you write your first R01. Some other institutions don't think like that, this terrible way of thinking, and they think that's very valuable to writing a K because K awards actually have better funding rates. And so there's plenty of institutions that have K-POPP programs. There are, hopefully your institution has that. My institution certainly does it. Don't laugh. My K-POPP program, which I'm a part of, is called K-POPP. I didn't come up with the name, but we actually have a 12-session, very intensive, soup to nuts K award application program. We actually go through templates for the reference letters. We go through templates for budgets, help you with that. We have a concierge experience like helping you apply for your K. So yes, I admit it does differ by institution, and you should be aware of that.
And I think to that point, Edwin, Dr. Charlebois was indicating that it is, an important endeavor to get that institutional support letter. So the fact that your institution is providing templates, et cetera, are really, really helpful. The other question that we have is about primary mentors. Should primary mentors be NIH funded from the same institute that you're applying for or applying to, I should say? Okay,
this is a really tough question. I certainly feel, so look, we all do interdisciplinary research, and I think I'm a true believer when it comes to people do better work when the research team is diverse, okay? And I don't think necessarily everyone on the research mentorship team has to be from the same institution. I do think, though, that the primary mentor, so you can have 4 or 5 multiple mentors, but the primary mentor should be housed at your institution. That's just my personal opinion, only because mentors often are sponsors. Hopefully you all understand the difference of that. And they can help you navigate difficult political issues that you might be experiencing. And it's really tough to do that when your mentee is at another institution, because you can't affect political change for your mentee who's at another institution. But the other mentors certainly can come from other institutions. You just have to make sure you convince the reviewer that even though these other mentors are at the other institution, we have a very clear communication plan and we're already tight knit. Because what reviewers don't want is for you to be ignored. The people who just happen to sign a letter of support for your K, it's just for your K, and they're not really there to help you. So yes, if you do that, just make sure you give a really strong rationale and buy-in that you'll be able to do that. But the primary mentor, I think, should be at the same place.
Well, thank you so much. I know we're at the top of the hour, but I think we have one more very yes question that says, for a K99 ROO, does it apply for both patient-oriented and non-patient-oriented research? So is it both patient and also non-patient, correct? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, traditionally when it started, it was very much a basic science award grant, but that's transitioned over the past 3 years to both patient-oriented research and basic science. And so yes, I have plenty of people doing health disparities work who are actually getting K99. That is possible. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Shimbo, for an incredible presentation, and everyone, audience, for your participation. We really, really appreciate it, and see you at the next webinar. Thank you again.
Great.